Okay, today we were going to talk about right action from the Noble Eightfold Path. Um, right action. Uh, so we have right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So those are the 8 aspects of the Eightfold Path. And so we were on the fourth one, which is right action. And Uh, we kind of already covered this one more in depth by doing the 5 precepts. So, one of the precepts was dealing with speech, which we did right speech already. So, when we take the vow to not lie or to not be deceitful, uh, that is dealing with our right speech. But 3 of those precepts that we vow to do deal with our right action. So when I did each one, um, really, essentially, that in itself encompasses the majority of what we do in right action. So basically, when I take my vow to not take any life or not to kill any living creature, when I take my vow to not take things that are not freely given, not to steal, right? And not to commit sexual misconduct. Those 3 aspects of the 3 precepts um, encompasses the majority of what right action is about. Doing the right thing with my actions, things that can um, produce enlightenment. And so it's important to remember that the Buddhist perspective on these is um, is to not cause suffering to anyone else and not bring suffering on ourselves. So that's particularly important to remember with the sexual misconduct, because this is not like a sin versus um, not sinning, obeying a law, that a divinely written law, as opposed to not obeying it. This is simply looking at our actions and being conscientious of each action we do, all of our behaviors, and how it may affect somebody, how it could hurt somebody, how it could hurt ourselves. So if we see that an action that is not in the precepts will at some point potentially cause harm to ourselves or to others, we should refrain from that action. So the precepts are the things um, that people do on a regular basis that cause harm. Now, the 5th precept deals with the not taking intoxicating chemicals. It deals with the mental state of a person, being able to stay conscientious at all times, so that we can be meditative and walk towards enlightenment, nirvana. So it's really important with all of these, to remember it's all about not bringing suffering on ourselves or to others. And so when we look at our actions that are in the precepts, particularly in those three precepts deal with actions where we most commonly harm people. So um, usually people is what we're thinking about, but particularly with the uh, not taking life, we are very considerate of all creatures, and to be conscientious of life in general and the consequences that our actions can bring. So when you eat a vegetarian diet, because you've taken this oath to not kill life, for example, as a part of your right action. So you take part of a vegetarian diet. Um, when we're doing that, um, part of this can just be a reminder to yourself consistently that every time you eat a meal and you recognize there's no meat on that plate, it serves as a reminder, I'm not harming an animal. How much more should I refrain from harming another person? So that's one way to look at that. But the stealing aspect is quite self-evident. Anytime you're stealing from somebody, you are causing harm to them. And there we have different ways that we try to justify stealing if we want to do that. But at the end of the day, we are harming somebody, and we end up suffering the consequences if we decide to steal something in ways that we cannot perceive until after the fact. And then that's when regret sets in. Sexual misconduct is the one where a lot of people, because they maybe come from a Christian background, thinking of the biblical way to think about that. And so the temptation can be to try to think of it as, a man and a woman who are married to have children. And in Buddhism, that is not the case. There's no divine decree in Buddhism at all. It was a person who reached enlightenment, and we have a completely different philosophy on the existence of gods. In a sense, it's not. Like I've said before, it's a non-theistic religion in the sense that you can believe in gods or not believe in gods, and so it's really not relevant to our struggle to reach enlightenment. And so there are obvious philosophical thoughts that can be brought up if you become a Buddhist. And think about it the way we think about it, and you may realize that the philosophical underpinnings of that is very different from Christianity, because in Christianity you have the philosophical idea that there is a God who is directly involved in everything, and that would seem not to be the case if believing or not believing has become irrelevant. So in Buddhism, your sexual relations are only important to look at in as much as you are considering their effect on yourself and on others. If you are causing harm to somebody, if your sexual behavior is bringing harm, okay? If you're being deceitful about your sexual behavior, if you consider yourself poly, for example, you have to be honest with all of your partners. If you're going to have multiple partners, each person needs to be aware that they're one of many, and they have to be okay with that, because they have a right to make a decision that they don't want to be one of many. They want to be the only one. They have a right to make that decision. So just because you think being poly is okay, and it might be for you, it's not okay to not allow that other person to know, because they should be able to make a decision if that's what they want for themselves. So it is harming them if you don't let them know. You have to be upfront and honest with integrity that this is who you are, and let them make that decision that they want to be in your life or not. And that's where this idea of clinging, we start recognizing when we start to do these precepts, and we start to do right action, we start to recognize well, why would I not want to let them all know, for example? And maybe you're very attached to one, and like you don't want to let that person go, and so you find yourself struggling because it's like, okay, well, I want this. uh, Sexual behavior in general, why it's even mentioned in the precepts, um, it's a very strong appetite, it's a very strong desire, and we can become addicted to that. So really any addiction, constant pleasure, like even overeating, it would be seen as something that we have to consider in Buddhism. Any addictive behavior. So cigarette smoking is not mentioned in the precepts, but if we're addicted to cigarette smoking, or in my case, I vape nicotine. Um, we consider that that's an addiction, which means I'm clinging to it. And so perhaps it would be good to get to a place mentally and spiritually where I can just let that go. Okay? So anytime you have some sort of addictive behavior where you cling to it, there has to come to a point, if you want to reach all the way to enlightenment, if I want to get all the way to enlightenment, which I do, hopefully, at some point I would have to let go of the nicotine vapes. And if I choose to continue to cling to that and to continue to refuse to let it go, then that would be something that could impede me to make it to enlightenment. So any type of pleasure that we get attached to. Now, if it's just like, something you can take it or leave it, you're not like, well, somebody comes into your life and they're a wonderful person and they're a great friend, and they decide they don't want to be your friend anymore. Do you feel that tug or that pull where you want to try to prevent them from ceasing to be your friend? Particularly happens in romantic relationships where you get romantically involved with somebody, and then that person becomes so important to you. If that person were to break up with you, that it's like your whole world is shattering. I felt that in my lifetime. A lot of us have, and that's because there was an unhealthy attachment to that person. And it's not that you shouldn't love that person and shouldn't continue to be with that person if they're willing. But at the point where that person is saying, I don't want to be with you anymore, the mature adult thing to do, although maybe hard, is to allow that person to go. If that person no longer wants to be part of your life, it's not easy, but sometimes that's what you got to do. And so there's a sense of acceptance and allowing other people to be their own person, and to not try to control and manipulate people within right action as well. And one other thing that starts to happen within right action is a sense of compassion and love towards really all of humanity, but not just humanity. Like I've mentioned, animals, creatures, everything. But when we start to think in that way and be selfless rather than selfish, and try to consider the needs of other people, as this process happens, and we are, we start with the precepts, but we are evaluating, and especially as you get into the farther along in the Eightfold Path towards the more meditative states, and you're very conscientious of every action, and you realize, you start with like my sexual behavior, or my, am I saying cruel things to people in your words and watching your words? But as you progress in that, you start to, your brain will shift and start to analyze everything you do and to really consider its effects. And that's really where you want to get to. So we said there was right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. And right mindfulness, that's where you are doing that. You are looking at your actions. You are analyzing your actions. You are trying to understand your motivations. Sometimes we know our motivations right off the bat, but sometimes our motivations aren't as clear even to us. Is this why I'm doing this, or am I subconsciously trying to maneuver myself in a situation where this other thing can happen? And trying to be honest with ourselves that this is what I want, this is why I want it, and to be able to understand the implications of how those actions can affect others. And so once we start thinking this way, there are a lot of actions. You can't make a law or set of rules that would literally cover every single potentially harmful action that you could do. So we had to start off with the 5 precepts, and then we, as we progress in right action, we realize there's a whole bunch of actions, like let's say, 70% of society does them, no problem, but maybe there's, maybe another 20% does it, and it's a mixture of motivations of good and bad, and then there's another 10% where, maybe you fall in that 10% for that particular action. You're like, well, most people do it and it's nothing wrong with it, but when I do it, my motivation's completely off. And there is no way to make a precept to tell you not to do that. You're with that particular action, you're in a minority in people that need to stop doing that action. And so that's part of the learning process in right action in Buddhism. And so that's really, I guess, the essence of what I needed to say for this particular deep dive. Right effort is going to be next. There's really not a lot to say about it, so maybe I could just mention a couple of things right now. Because it really permeates all of the other aspects of the Eightfold Path. Because every time you take a step in the Eightfold Path, every time you are participating in the Eightfold Path, you're doing right effort. Because you are trying and you're just aligning yourself with the Eightfold Path itself. You're simply putting forth an effort because you know that you're not perfect, and you know that I'm not going to just suddenly snap my fingers and read this Eightfold Path and then boom, just like mentally just situate everything in my brain and be able to do it all perfectly. It's just not going to happen. I've realized through really harsh experiences that, like baby steps are actually the most productive. There was a time in my life when I was in my 20s. I'm over 40 now, and there was a time in my life when, in my 20s, when I would, try to take on the world. And I realized that it was better just to take baby steps. That it's more productive, because when you fail at taking on everything all at once, everything crashes down. And it ends up producing much worse results. I think even Jesus has a parable that I think implies something similar, where about putting new wine into new wineskins and old wine into old wineskins. you can't simply just um, force everything or all all aspects of the Eightfold Path onto yourself at once and expect it to take hold. So it's just, you do a little bit here, you do a bit there. If you're like, you can't let go of meat, all at once. Maybe that's your thing. You love meat, you love steak, and then one solution could be start with one day that you eat vegetarian, and 6 days a week you eat steak. And then after a month, you go to 2 days a week you eat vegetarian. And then a month later, you go to 3 days a week. And then maybe you do that for, the rest of the year, because it's that way you're not taking on too much at once. And then maybe, you go to 4 days, to 5 days. And then you get to where maybe eventually you have 1 day a week that you eat meat. And, eventually you bring it to maybe once every other week. And you just you find yourself being able to let go more and more if you do it in pieces. But if you're really clinging to that steak and you really love that steak and you just stop eating steak altogether because you think you're going to suddenly be more holy if you're not eating steak, what's more likely to happen is everything's going to fall apart and you're just going to pig out on some steak, and it could even cause you to stop practicing other aspects of the Eightfold Path. That's, typically types of things you see happen when you take on too much. So you do these little baby steps. You take one step at a time. It's not easy. It's just like meditation. It's like you want to start meditating. You may not feel like 1 minute meditating a day does anything, and it might not do anything. It might do absolutely nothing for you. It may not help you in any way. You may not even be able to properly clear your thoughts within that 1 minute of meditation. So essentially you weren't even meditating. But getting into the practice, even 1 minute a day, building the habit so that at some point 2 minutes a day, okay, you're already putting 1 minute, what's an extra minute? Getting into that habit, 3 minutes a day, 4 minutes a day, and eventually you're actually meditating. Baby steps are always the pathway to the most productive letting go of things that you cling to that are difficult to get rid of. So I'm not... that's pretty much where I'm at because with my vaping nicotine, because I don't... I've got other things that I'm dealing with that I think are more important to get away, to try to work on. I have other aspects of my life that I think I need to do first before I work on vaping. Vaping is probably the least of my concerns. I've got other things that I do that are not particularly beneficial to me or others. So working on those things first. And, at some point, I will quit vaping. And it might be sometime pretty soon. It is expensive. So that's kind of one of the things I've noticed with life is it's really important to know that baby steps are much more productive. That's all I have for today. So we did right action and right effort, right livelihood. We got 3 more left. So we got right livelihood, right mindfulness, and right concentration left. Okay, so we'll probably do right livelihood together with... Well, I don't want to say anything yet. I'll figure it out when I'm ready to do it.